Today we have an amazing speaker, courtesy of the Center for Health and Communication. So with that said, rather than stealing any of our thunder, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Charlie Nant.
Thanks everyone for coming, and this is very exciting for me also personally. And it is my great honor to introduce our fall 2015 CHRC Distinguished Speaker, Dr. Nabi. Dr. Nabi is a professor of communication at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her research interests focus on discrete emotions influence on message processing and decision making in response to media messages that concern health or social issues. As many of you know, Dr. Nabi is a leading scholar in the field of mass communication and has published over 70 articles and
real honor for me to be here, and of course it's always so fun to have the opportunity to talk about your own work with people who are listening attentively and asking good questions and that sort of thing. So this is really a pleasure for me, and so thank you for the invite. I've been interested in issues of emotion, media, and health since I was a graduate student, and there's just something about emotion as a motivator for human behavior that is fascinating to me. And it's been surprising in some ways, not in others, that we haven't seen as much research on emotion in a communication context, in health behavior in particular. And it's been sort of slow to develop over the time that I've been in the discipline. So what I'm hoping to do today is to hopefully introduce, let me see if this is, there we go, is to spend a little bit of time, very little, just elaborating a bit on why I believe emotion matters and is important to study, and then to talk about some different ways that I've been thinking about the way that we could study emotion in a health and media context, and hopefully you'll have some ideas of ways that you might be able to do something similar. So the three areas that I'll talk about today, first are thinking about emotion as an independent variable, a little differently than we have thought about it up to this point. So thinking about emotion as more of an independent variable, but not just emotion, but this idea of emotional flow, and I'll describe that more in just a little bit. I also think it's important that we think more about the role of emotion as a mediator in effects that we tend to look at as these cognitive processes, but thinking about where would the role of emotion be, and how could that help us understand these phenomena better. And I'll use social comparison theory as a context, and that was actually the article that I believe ASCOR is honoring this year. And finally, I'm going to go a little bit off the grid here and talk about emotion as a dependent variable, but not as a psychological construct, but more as a physiological construct. So we'll see what you think about all that. But let me begin by talking about emotion more generally. My work is generally driven and informed by functional theories of emotion, which basically say that emotions serve adaptive purposes for us. Like the reason why we have them is they help us to get along in our environment and to adapt and survive. So each emotion really represents a unique person-environment relationship. As you perceive something happening in the environment as it relates to your goals, that will lead to an emotional arousal that in turn sets a goal for you and should motivate goal-consistent action. So for example, with fear, you perceive in your environment there would be imminent threat to physical safety, that you would experience the emotion of fear, and once you feel fear, you're then motivated to protect yourself, and your action should reflect that. Anger, different discrete emotion, also negative. If you perceive in the environment a demeaning offense, someone has taken advantage of you or is not respecting you, that could arouse anger, and that feeling of anger would then motivate the behavior of attack, right, for some restoration or defense of your property, for example. We can go through multiple emotions and sort of see similar patterns. So that's the orientation that I take to the work that I do in emotion. So why think about emotion in the context of health and media effects? Well, it's a pretty simple argument. A key outcome that we're interested in health communication and media effects generally is behavior of audiences. Well, emotion directs behavior. So therefore, it seems like emotion should be of critical interest to those of us who are interested in media effects and health effects in particular. So again, there's something about this very basic argument that makes me wonder, in fact, why are we not looking at this more? When we look at the health communication research and emotion, it typically relies on persuasion. We're looking at fear appeals in particular, right? So that's when people think about persuasion and emotion, fear appeals, right? So overwhelmingly, the focus has been on fear appeals. And over the past 60 years of fear appeal research, what we see is an emphasis on cognition. What are the cognitions and the thoughts we have that will lead to some adaptive outcome, some functional behavior as a result of exposure to this fear-inducing message? A little bit of research on guilt, sort of intermittently over the decades. There's been research on humor, particularly in advertising context, a little bit that's beginning to emerge more in a health context. There's a little bit of research on anger, some emerging research on hope, but it's very sporadic. Right? But here's a question I want to pose to you. Okay? Is the term fear appeal really a misnomer? Are these really fear appeals? Are these emotional appeals really as monolithic as we suggest? We talk about fear appeals, and we're looking fear, we're measuring fear, but could there be something else going on? And this led me to the notion of emotional flow. And emotional flow, as I define it, is the evolution of the emotional experience during exposure to a health message, or it could be any media message, that's marked by one or more emotional shifts. And these shifts could be between negative to positive emotions, like fear to relief. It could be between going the other direction, positive to negative, or between two positive or two negative emotions. Okay? So this is and there can be multiple shifts, they can vary in intensity, but this is the general idea. And it comes from the notion of appraisal and reappraisal. That is, in our daily lives, we are appraising our environment, sometimes consciously, oftentimes subconsciously, for what's happening and how it relates to our goals, and therefore our emotional experiences are shifting as a function of this appraisal and reappraisal process. But when it comes to media and health messages, we think about the emotional arousal as being somewhat static. Right, that we experience an emotion and we have fear, and that's kind of it. But the emotion is a response to the message, and the message is evolving and unfolding, particularly in response to video messages or to a narrative, for example. And so to think about emotion as a static experience, when really this is a dynamic phenomenon, is sort of puzzling to me. It seems like, I think Amber's nodding because I know her work is in this area, so she's on board, our emotional experiences are dynamic, whether it's in the real world or whether it's in response to mediated messages, and that we should think about that process in the work that we do. So this is a sort of more theoretical argument, but I will try to weave in some data here and there that I have that might speak to this a little bit. When we look at the research on the persuasive effects of emotional shifts, really shifting from these positive to negative emotions as I described, there's very little research. And what is out there typically focuses on kind of general emotion, sort of affective states rather than discrete emotions. And I'll make the case for why I think discrete emotions actually matter a bit. There are two studies that were published that looked at positive to negative and negative to positive shifts relative to negative only in the context of excessive drinking, and they said, oh, these shift messages work better. Again, I would point out that they focus more on affect rather than on emotions, which are goal-directed. But they also use messages that we would never use in the real world. And I should have brought an example of it, but basically, they're like paragraphs, like, man is on a bench, he drinks too much, he's on the ground, he goes to the hospital. But then he's okay. That was pretty much the message. It's like this almost storyboard bullet point. There's no sense of identification, there's no sense of consequence, there's no way to connect. It's not the kind of messages we would see in a health communication context. But they suggest that shifts may matter. There's certainly research on incidental emotional shifts in the persuasion domain, in health persuasion domain. I would point specifically to the work that Jim Dillard and his colleagues did 20 years ago on fear appeals doing more than just scare people. And essentially, they showed a number of PSAs to students and asked them, what do you feel? And they measured 8 different emotions, and lo and behold, they found that most PSAs evoked at least 2 and oftentimes 3 or more different emotions. And they also related that to behavioral outcome. They weren't focused on the flow of emotions, but just the fact that we do have multiple emotional responses as being important. The research on guilt appeals says, well, guilt appeals in the media can oftentimes backfire because they also evoke anger. So there's evidence that these multiple emotional experiences can have implications for persuasive outcome. But rather than think about these other emotions as sort of incidental and oftentimes damaging, what if we thought about them as shifts that we can harness to try to enhance the persuasive effect? So let me reassess fear appeals. Let's just go back for a moment. The essence of the fear appeal research at this moment, right, is that they should evoke 4 cognitions, 4 perceptions. You have your audience perceive a severe threat to which they're susceptible, they will experience the emotion of fear. If they then also perceive there to be a response that can help address that threat, and they feel that they're able to enact that response, that will ultimately lead to adaptive action. Okay, so these 4 cognitions matter. But efficacy is likely associated with the emotion of hope. Okay? And hope motivates persistence in the face of adversity, right? So it helps us persevere. Now, if you look in the literature that distinguishes self-efficacy and hope, basically self-efficacy is more cognitive. It's the awareness, the situation-specific confidence that you can do something. Whereas hope is the motivational force that you want to do it, right? So one's more cognitive, one's more motivational. So the argument I make is that maybe fear appeals that are effective are really those that evoke fear and then evoke hope. They're not just fear appeals, they're fear-hope appeals. And the ones that are maladaptive are just fear appeals, fear-anger appeals, or something else. Okay? But is hope ever measured in the fear appeal literature? If you have a study that you've seen that measures hope along with fear, please let me know, because I have not found one yet. Because why would you? They're fear appeals. Why would you measure positive emotion? It doesn't make any sense, because we conceptualize them as this unidimensional negative experience. Now, I do have one study. Actually, I'm working with a colleague who also happens to have hope and fear, and I happen to have hope and fear. So this is not a test of emotional flow, but just to demonstrate that there is a role for hope in fear appeals. I have some data where we looked at, it was a melanoma awareness, sort of sun safety promotion message that we use. And we measured, after exposure to this message that had a lot of different emotions, but fear was dominant. What happens in terms of their intentions to engage in sun safety behaviors, and then a week later we followed up and asked them about their actual sun safety behavior in the previous week. So just, this is very basic and real quick, but efficacy and hope did correlate in our data. It's smaller than I would have thought, to be honest with you, but there's still a significant relationship. And fear and hope actually positively related to one another, which is interesting, because typically you see negative emotions grouped together, positive emotions grouped together, and they negatively correlate. But here we see that they actually are relating to one another in a positive manner. Binary correlations, really basic and simple. Fear, self-efficacy, and hope all related to intentions and behaviors. Self-efficacy being the strongest, hope being the weakest, but all significantly related to intentions and to their behaviors a week later. When we put these in a regression with various controls that I won't detail now, fear and efficacy were both significant predictors of behavioral intention, which is what you'd expect from the fear appeal literature. Note, there was no significant interaction between these two, which is what the extended parallel process model would predict, and yet evidence has not supported that interaction. We don't have that interaction here. However, there was a significant interaction between efficacy and hope that basically suggests that those who are higher in self-efficacy after feeling hope are even more likely to intend, and then the intentions predicted behaviors a week later. So my point here is I'm not testing emotional flow necessarily, but that hope matters, right? And that this shift from fear to hope may be something that can help us understand the conditions under which fear appeals, right, may be more effective. Let's talk about guilt appeals for a moment. We know that people feel guilt when they perceive themselves to have violated an internalized norm and they blame themselves. Oh, I was late, it's my fault, I shouldn't have been, I feel guilty. And it motivates us to want to make amends, make reparation. And that should be associated with the relief of guilt. So perhaps effective guilt appeals are the ones where our audience shifts from guilt to relief, because we know that when people shift from guilt to anger, it doesn't work. But just guilt alone, it's got to shift in some way. It's intolerable. We don't like to feel guilt. Can we design messages to shift people from guilt to a positive emotion that might lead to a more effective outcome and a persuasive effective guilt that right now has been a bit challenging to find in the context of media messages? What about humor? This one's a little tougher. I actually was reading the proofs on the plane out here. So this is actually interesting. It's almost there. I was interested in how humor could be used in a health context to diffuse anxiety about performing difficult to perform health behaviors, like detection behaviors. The argument being that health outcomes can be scary, these threats can be scary, but performing the behavior can be scary too. Right? Going to the dentist can be scary because what will they find? Checking your skin for mold can be scary because what if you have skin cancer? So that can be scary too. So could we use humor to shift audiences from anxiety, right, to amusement, and then amusement to reduce the anxiety? So again, it's an emotional flow across this message. This, again, was not a study designed to test emotional flow, but just to demonstrate the dynamic nature of the emotional experience and its relevance to outcome. The model here is that people who experience amusement, right, perceived humor, would have less anxiety about the health behavior. If they had less anxiety, their attitude would be more positive, and that would then predict intentions and behaviors. In this study, which called Laughing Face of Fear, it's a decent study. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to title my paper. So when I come up with what I have to admit, I was like, I kind of like this one. So I don't know. Hopefully you guys like it too. But anyway, the point is that we have about 200 undergraduates, and we had asked them to read scripts that were designed to be humorous, promoting either breast self-examination or testicular self-examination. These data were collected before the change in recommendations about monthly breast self-exams, just so you know. So at the time, this was sort of consistent with the CDC recommendations. So we asked, among other variables, initially, what is your anxiety about performing a self-exam? We asked them, after they saw the message, how funny they found it, the processing motivation, and their attitudes and intentions. There's actually 2 studies reported in this paper. I'll just put up the data for one. But as you can see, our predictions were supported, which is always fun to see, but people who found the message funny had less anxiety about self-exams. That took away the barrier to having a more positive attitude. So the less anxiety, the more positive the attitude, the more positive the attitude, the stronger their intentions. We did follow up in a second study where we did ask behavior a week later, and that intentions predict behaviors in these relationships largely held. So again, not designed to test emotional shift, but it does suggest that there is an emotional evolution that's taking place that's important to consider. Because if you just look at, did people find the message funny, and were they persuaded? The answer is not really. Right? But we do see an indirect relationship through a change in another emotion. That's important. You might also note that there's a cognitive way in which humor was influencing attitudes. That is, people who found the message funny were more motivated to process it, read it more deeply, and given the stronger arguments that were in there, they had a more positive attitude as well. So amusement or humor had both an affective influence as well as a cognitive influence. Okay. Narratives. We have a whole separate paper on narratives that Melanie Green and I wrote that came out earlier this year. But there's increasing evidence for narratives' persuasive influence. And there's a whole lot of attention on narratives right now. And a hallmark, a signature of narratives is the emotional journey that it takes the audience on. I have a friend who's a screenwriter. He's like, basically, he wants someone to become friends with someone. And then you take that person, and then you put them in a tree, and then you shake the tree, and then you throw rocks at them while they're in the tree, and then you get them down. Right? That's basically the storyline of a number of different narratives, that you get people to care and you take them on this emotional journey. So what Melanie and I did in our piece here is to think about what is the role of either actual emotional shifts or the desire for emotional shifts in message exposure, message processing, and then I think importantly, what happens after the message is over. So with message selection, there's extensive research on mood management that suggests that the emotional state that we're in, the affective state that we're experiencing, can influence the media that we choose to expose ourselves to, and the narratives or the stories that we would like to consume. So that is, in essence, a desire for an emotional shift. I feel this way and I don't want to. So that can influence what we even choose to expose ourselves to. We might also think about the desire to avoid a shift. I'm happy, I don't want to read that health message. I don't want to watch that story. It's going to ruin my mood. So thinking about where people are at in terms of shifts can help us understand what they choose to expose themselves to or choose to avoid. In terms of message processing, we can think about these points of emotional shift where you're scared and then relieved, or things are okay. Oh my God, what just happened? Right? If you watch Downton Abbey, right? This is everything's fine, and bam, like being characters killed off. You're shocked, right? But it orients you. You're focused on this message in a way that you might not have been when you were lulled into this sort of comfortable state. So thinking about how these points of emotional shift could orient us to the message, could influence how our cognitive resources are allocated to encoding certain parts of messages over others. The research on suspense. Suspense is an emotional shift. You go from fear to relief, fear to relief, anticipation, fear, relief. Right? That's what suspense is as a form of emotional shift that keeps us engaged with the story, and it gets us to come back. A cliffhanger. Oh my gosh, I have to watch next week. Right? Excitation transfer. Right? The idea that we have an emotional reaction to one stimulus that heightens the second emotional reaction. This is all sort of consistent with the idea of the dynamic experience of emotion and how it can influence how we engage with the actual content of the message. And afterwards, and I find this particularly interesting myself, is after you have your narrative experience, how might you continue to engage either with that message or with the content or with other people as a result of the state that you're in and the desire to shift. So we might think about if you're left in a state of confusion, right? Or you're anxious, then you might think about that message more with an attempt to try to understand what happened and get some resolution. You might discuss it with other people. You'll post it on Facebook and share that. Oh my gosh, did you see that episode? I can't believe what just happened. You're reliving that message. You're retelling it. Right? So it's like a multiple exposure that can influence the effectiveness of that message. So we might watch it again, get actual repeated exposure. Our anxiety might lead us to seek out more information on that health topic. So there's a number of ways that in the narrative research, you're in the lab, you see a narrative, and we ask what people's behaviors are, our intentions, maybe we ask about behavior a week later, but what else are they doing, right? And how might emotion be playing a role in that? So let me sort of bring this back a little bit. Hopefully you're on board with the idea that emotions are dynamic. It's important to think about that, but let me bring it into the context of health message design. Right? How can we harness this? Well, I think the first step would be to look at what are the benefits and perhaps costs of different emotional experiences. So for example, with fear, one of its benefits is it does get our attention. Like it's scary, we orient towards it, but it is unpleasant. And it might lead us to want to avoid certain behaviors or contexts. Right? So there's a benefit, but there's a cost. With anger, the benefit is it motivates a purge behavior. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. I'm going to take care of that right now. Right? On the other hand, it could lead you to attack the message source and just reject the message. So we have to be careful in how we evoke anger and in how we direct it. With humor, it gets attention. We like things that are humorous. general context. So how do we get attention? Well, fear or humor might be a really good technique to capture audience's attention, especially in a very cluttered, competitive media environment. Right? So emotional stimuli can capture attention, but we don't want it to distract or to upset, right? So maybe if we want deeper processing, the shift should be from humor or fear to something like sadness or anger, which are associated with deeper information processing. If we want particular types of action, fear might be great for avoidant action. But if we want persistence, right, if we want people to engage in behaviors that could be challenging, then hope or even anger, depending on the context, could be really valuable. So I'm not proposing that this is exactly the flow chart that we want to use, but rather to think about what the benefits are cognitively in message processing of these different emotional experiences, and to think about how to design messages with this in mind. So we're not just doing a fear appeal, and we're not just having a guilt appeal, but we have an emotional flow across these messages. And by the way, I find social sharing to be incredibly interesting and something that our field is picking up on more and more with viral videos and that sort of thing. And the viral video research basically says that it doesn't matter what emotion it is, as long as it's intense, right? It can be positive or negative. People are going to share them, or what's surprising. It turns out, by the way, that oftentimes humor is based on incongruity, right, which is surprising. So maybe if our goal is social sharing, it's not really about the actual flow, it's just about the intensity. So to kind of propose a research agenda, there's a lot of different directions that I think this would go in. We, in terms of integrating the notion of shift into our research on persuasion and health communication, we could think about linking content to emotions that could help with the particular goals that we have, as I just described. We absolutely need to measure multiple emotions, but not just multiple emotions, but what sequence are they occurring in? You're not going to have hope and then fear, typically. Right? But fear and then hope, well, that makes more sense. So thinking about what sequences might make the most sense. And then looking maybe at the points of emotional shift. Are those the points that people find most memorable? Is that the information that they're encoding, paying attention to? So looking at what people remember, what's influential, and were shifts occurring at that point or not, right, would be important for us in terms of how we design messages. Thinking about different message types, expository versus narrative, the extent of shifts, the magnitude of shifts. I mean, there's a whole host of questions that come out of this. I think my goal here is to just encourage those of us who are interested in emotion and influence to just think more broadly about the emotional experience and its dynamic nature, rather than being as static as we've been for the past 60 years, give or take. So that's sort of a big chunk of what I want to talk about. I don't know if there's a clock here, so I don't know where I'm at timing-wise. Oh, okay. So this part's a lot shorter than the next. Okay, perfect. Well, I'll just keep going. I didn't know if there'd be any how you guys do. I'll just keep going, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. Let me shift the talk. I didn't mean to. That was like not intended, but I guess I'm primed for it. I want to think about the role of emotion as a mediator in these effects processes. The dominant theories of media effects, and many in health effects as well, things like social cognitive theory, theory of reason to action, cultivation theory, a host of theories of media effects generally, and in persuasion and in health communication, that have limited attention to the role of emotion. They're highly cognitively driven. They were developed in the midst of the cognitive revolution in the 70s and in the 80s, and the focus is on cognition. And as a result, I think they're missing an important component. And I want to focus today on social comparison theory. And the argument that I would like to make to you is that social comparison, it's not just the discrepancy. Social comparison is about the perceived discrepancy between you and another person on your perceived abilities. It's not just that perception of the discrepancy, but it's how you feel about that discrepancy that matters. I can say like, oh, Xiao Li is so much more organized and efficient than I am, right? But if I say, good for her, that's great, I'm inspired, that's going to lead to different outcomes than, oh, I'm so depressed, I feel so bad about myself. Different outcomes based on the emotion I have about the discrepancy. Okay? So just a brief background in social comparison theory and emotion and how those have been integrated. As I said, we compare ourselves to similar others on relevant characteristics, and we can compare upward or downward, right? So you're better than me when I make this comparison, or I feel like I outperform you. In the research, both upward and downward comparisons are associated with both positive and negative emotions. I can compare to you and feel hopeful or envious based on upward social comparison. Downward social comparison, I can feel prideful or I can be worried, oh my God, what if I turn out like you, right? So it can be either emotion, right? Positive or negative in either concept. I would be fortunate if I could be just like. Okay. Now, there's also a lot of evidence that suggests that social comparison affects behavior. The question is, what is the role of emotion here? We know it evokes emotions. We know that social comparison relates to behavior. What's the link? And that's where things get a little fuzzy. Abraham Tester, in his work on the self-evaluation made to do social comparison, focuses on only upward social comparison, and he talks about emotional arousal and how it can affect various cognitive shifts or action. He's really coming from a cognitive dissonance standpoint here. So a lot of he's talking about is what's happening inside the mind. So, I'm going to denigrate the source, or I'm going to, sort of self-promote in my mind. It's more about cognitive shift. But importantly, he's not tested it. And he's really focused, again, more on cognition rather than behavior. So in this study that I conducted with one of my graduate students, called Inspired by Hope, Motivated by Envy, guess what two emotions we think are important? Sort of highlighted there. Our argument, again, is that these discrete emotions matter. And in this study, it was actually a kind of reanalysis of data that I had collected for one primary purpose, but had this sort of small little element embedded in it. We had female undergraduates who watched the cosmetic surgery makeover programs. And we had them complete the survey that assessed their emotional responses when they think about watching these programs, how these programs tend to make them feel, their identification with these program participants, how much they socially compare. We also included something called self-enhancement, which I won't be talking about, but we also included a desire for a range of cosmetic enhancements, things like getting Botox injections, lip plumpers, there's a ear tufts, nose jobs, those sorts of things. Right? So our first hypothesis was that those who identify with these program participants are more likely to socially compare, which comes from the social comparison literature, and we found strong support for that hypothesis. Second, we predicted that social comparison would associate with stronger emotions as well as stronger behavioral motivation. And what we found is that those who socially compared felt more hope, felt more envy, felt stronger happiness and pity, and that they were also more likely to say, yes, I would like to have more cosmetic surgery. Our third hypothesis, and I didn't lay out the foundation for this particularly well, but given that envy is more action-driven than hope, and it's like, I want to achieve, I covet, and I want, whereas hope is, I hope. There's a less of a strong sense of agency with hope. That people who were experiencing envy would have stronger behavioral motivation than hope, and hope would be stronger behavioral motivation than sadness. Which we found support for. Envy had the strongest relationship to behavioral intentions relative to hope, hope relative to sadness. Those are significantly different from one another. And then the question that is sort of the primary motivation for this research is, how does emotion mediate this relationship between social comparison and behavior? And what we found is that envy fully mediated, hope partially mediated, and when we put them together, envy was the only significant mediator. Right? So people might feel hopeful, and they might feel pity, and they might feel happiness, but envy was the emotional state that was more likely to predict these intentions, and to the extent that you buy into the intent-to-behavior relationship, that this suggests that if you're watching these programs and you're feeling envious, you might be the one who's more likely to engage in, to pursue cosmetic enhancement, compared to those who are also watching and also socially comparing, but they're feeling something else. So future directions for this research, we can continue looking at emotions and social comparison. I have data on social comparison to romantic relationships in media, very similar results with hope and envy. Very different contexts. We have experimental data that suggests something sort of along these lines as well. But what I would be excited about. I'm working on the theoretical piece at the moment. This is where does emotion fit in all of these other theories that we're relying on that haven't really changed a whole heck of a lot, right? Little tweaks around the edges. Social cognitive theory, okay, is about positive and negative outcomes. What about the emotions people experience? Bandura talks about it a little bit, but we have not picked up on it very much. The theory of reason to action puts emotion like, oh yes, that's a background variable. That's over here. Marty Fishbein was in the audience when I gave my practice job talk, when I went on the job market for the first time, and he literally was picking dog hair off his sweater during my talk on emotion. He was thoroughly uninterested in this topic. But I think there's lots of ways in which emotion is relevant, not just as the background variable, so I'm working on that. Cognitive dissonance manipulations, they are guilt manipulations. Look at the transgression compliance research on guilt and the dissonance research, they're the same manipulations. And so there's a role for emotion and cognitive dissonance. The trans-theoretical model, moving people from stage, pre-contemplation, contemplation to ready for action, maybe different emotions are relevant for moving people from one stage to the next. So I believe there's a lot of ways in which we could enhance and help our current theories be more predictive by considering the role of emotional arousal. And then finally, let me talk about, and this is again a little off the grid, but thinking about emotion as a dependent variable, but more as a physiological phenomenon. There's extensive research, as I'm sure you're all well aware, that consuming media influences health outcomes in a number of ways. We can think about how it affects our learning, our attitudes, our behaviors, our intentions, our perceptions of the social norms, self-efficacy. So we have, what do all of these have in common? Okay? They focus on media content. And you might say, well, of course, we study communication, we look at messages, so of course the content is what matters. But let me offer an alternative perspective. What if we focus on the experience of media consumption rather than the content? So regardless of what we're watching, that's important, and I get it. But oftentimes we go to especially entertainment programming, we want to enjoy, to engage in different ways. So what if that experience of media consumption is relaxing? And if it's relaxing, that should reduce our stress. And if it reduces our stress, then that could potentially help mitigate the negative effects of stress on the body. And that could eventually lead to better psychological and physiological health. Now you might be thinking, where's emotion? What happened to that? Well, stress is sort of a higher order concept that incorporates all of these emotions. But stress is by definition the perception of your environment as it relates to you. Okay? And what are the demands placed on you and your resources to meet those demands? Okay? That is basically what emotion is, right? So anger is a stressor, fear is a stressor, joy is a stressor. These are all forms of stress. So when I talk about stress, that is the emotion construct here. It's just less differentiated than what I've been describing up to this point. So the research question that I had going into this is it possible, just like the food we consume, right? Our diet influences the health of our body. Could our media diet influence the health of our body based on biomarkers of stress? So I looked at cortisol with my research team. And cortisol is a hormone that's secreted by the endocrine system. It's considered the stress hormone. So when we're under prolonged stress, like graduate school or tenure track or something along those lines, or you live in a city where you have to commute and it's kind of tough out there. So we're under sort of chronic stress that our cortisol levels may accumulate. And when you have more cortisol in your system, and by the cortisol shifts throughout the day, it has a diurnal pattern of peaking around 1 minute. So it does change throughout the day. And it can change in response to a moment. If I scared you right now, your cortisol will likely elevate in 20 minutes. But it is cumulative. And those who have chronic stress will see these higher levels of cortisol in their system. And cortisol can be very damaging. It can disrupt the immune system function, disrupt thyroid function, disrupt your reproductive hormones, because those come from the endocrine system. If more of those resources are being put into pumping out cortisol, you have less for estrogen, progesterone, etc. It can lead to difficulties with conception, for example. It's associated with cognitive impairment, increased stomach fat, and therefore precursors for diabetes. So there's a lot of health outcomes that can be associated with cortisol. So the research on media and these biomarkers is very thin. It pretty much comes from sort of psychophysiological orientations, but they're not interested in media. They're really interested in using media as a stimulus. You can't, really threaten someone in the lab, but you can show them The Shining and try to scare them. And so these studies basically would show people The Shining, and they would show like comedy. And interestingly, across these studies, what they found is that whether it was joyful or humorous stimuli, or the frightening, shiny type stimuli, cortisol would go down. And they're like, this is weird. But from a media standpoint, it's not weird, because it's not just the content, right? There's more going on than the content. It's the experience of media consumption. So in this study that's now in press, I just wanted to write a study called Is Watching TV Good for You? To justify my own excessive consumption of television. I think there must be something good. And this study is part of a much larger study. We were looking at dating couples and their consumption of TV. And so there's a lot more going on here. But in this study, we did have 120 dating couples. And they were pre-screened for a number of medical conditions to make sure that their endocrine system was functioning in a normal fashion. And assuming they got through the screening, we emailed each member of the couple, so all 240 people, separately, we emailed them a survey that had sort of an extensive media diet sort of survey. And they had to complete it at least 2 days before coming to the lab, which we verified that they did. So then they come to the lab as a couple, and it was a 2-hour session, and there were a number of things we had to do. We had to make sure that they had anything to eat or drink within like an hour of coming in. They couldn't have exercised strenuously. They couldn't have been to the dentist. They could have had excessive amounts of alcohol within the past 24 hours. So given that we were doing this on a college campus and collecting data 7 days a week, there are some people we did have to send home and reschedule, but we eventually, after 9 months, we got our data. But once they got through all the screening, we took the first saliva sample, which is how we assessed cortisol. We then showed them 45 minutes of different stimuli, horror movies, romantic comedies, etc. We then collected a second saliva sample. They completed a survey about what they watched. We got the third saliva sample, and then they had a discussion about what they watched. All this was videotaped. And then we got the fourth saliva sample. The reason I lay all this out for you is because baseline cortisol is best measured by 4 to 5 measurements over the course of on that 24 hours, but really about an 18-hour period. That's a difficult thing to do without a lot of funding and cooperation, but it is acceptable to measure it within a shorter time frame as long as you've got at least 4 measurements, which we have, and as long as the data are collected around the same time of day, because cortisol does have this diurnal pattern where it's increasing in the mornings, decreasing in the afternoon, so all the data is collected in the afternoon. Oh, by the way, we offered them a snack bag. They had eaten like 3 hours and all that. And then we turned that into a dependent measure. Because I was curious, and there are some relationships between the cortisol levels during the study and what they chose as a snack afterwards. So I don't know what it means yet, but we'll figure it out. A couple of quick analysis notes. Cortisol tends to be highly skewed. We transform the data. I'm going to report first and average cortisol in case you have concerns that what they watched might have influenced what you see. So I'll present both. Because they came in with their partners, dating partners oftentimes have cortisol that correlates with one another. That was the case here. So if you live with someone, your cortisol probably correlates. You spend a lot of time with someone, it probably correlates. So we did account for that in our analysis. And importantly, cortisol did not correlate with perceived stress. So you think you're stressed, right? But your cortisol might be fine. You might think you're fine. Your cortisol might be out of whack. Okay? So these don't relate. Okay. So the influence of media diet, we looked at television, music, and video games because there was some research, extra research on these 3 media types. And genre, we looked at comedy, suspense, romance, and sports. Okay. And then we compared to perceived stress. Okay. So I know I'm running short on time, so I will be very quick. Here's what we found. So overall, there's no relationship between media consumption, TV consumption, and cortisol levels, but for women, the women who watch more television had lower cortisol. The reviewers didn't want me to claim causality, even though I measured the media consumption 2 days prior and all that, so I'm not going to make causal claims. But it is very interesting that this relationship emerges. It is the same degree as something like a fear appeal, right? That the magnitude of effect is about the same based on those meta-analyses. It's double that of a cultivation. Right? The cultivation analysis suggests the effects are about 0.1. This is double that. Interesting. Video games, the more video games played, the higher the cortisol level. For music, I don't know what to make of that. A little bit maybe with men and listening to music and having lower cortisol. Something is going on here. I don't want to make too much of any one relationship, but something is happening here. Okay? But look at perceived stress. None of the relationships overlap, and what we see is more, oh, when you're stressed, you watch more TV. When you're stressed, women listen to more music. That suggests a mood management trying to cope, okay? But very different from what we see with cortisol. With cortisol and genre, nothing. It wasn't about what you watch, it's that you're watching. It's not what game you're playing, it's that you're playing. Right? Perceived stress on the end, lots of stuff comes up. I actually found what's particularly interesting is that men especially really have higher stress watching romantic comedies. So I don't know, they're just like forced to go on date night or something. And for women, like they're like, I love watching sports. Maybe it's like the social experience if they're with a boyfriend. So there's something happening. But again, I don't want to go into the details. It's more the pattern of relationships that I think is important. So to wrap it up, media experience, and the keto diet can have implications for health, perhaps through our underlying physiology. And it would be so exciting to see more research in this area, particularly to not use perceived stress as an indicator of what's happening in the body. Right? That we really have two pathways. What is happening with perceived stress? It's important. But what's happening with physiological stress? And it would be great to see how this might relate to illness. We had some illness measures, they weren't particularly good, but this requires a lot of sort of longitudinal data. But just to sum it up, I think there's just a lot of really exciting ways that we can think about emotion in a media and health context that we just haven't explored, and they have theoretical significance and practical significance. We can move traditional lines of inquiry forward. We can challenge commonly held views about how these processes might work, and we can initiate new lines of inquiry that we haven't even thought to explore yet. So I'm excited about this. I hope there's something in here that I've talked about that will encourage you to think about the ways that emotion might be relevant in the work that you do. And again, I greatly appreciate your attention and the opportunity to come, and I will open up for questions.
Great time management, by the way. We do have about 10 minutes for questions, so please go ahead.
So I haven't had a chance to read the paper you wrote on ingredient, but when I do my research, I always have this running joke that I always include transportation because it's not working, never has. But I am interested in whether or not something like emotional flow would actually relate to this idea of narrative engagement. Right? So a lot of times narratives will have ups and downs, ups and downs, and that's going to be increasingly complex to measure. But I was wondering if in your research you started to notice any of these patterns emerge in terms of what actually gets people engaged with those narratives.
I think it's a really good question, and actually study co-viewing, and a lot of people who are in marriages or in dating, that they do sit down with their friends or they're with other people, and so a lot of the media research is based on this isolated viewing experience rather than the co-viewing experience. So that's one argument for why. The second, that's a little bit more practical, is that I was working with an interpersonal scholar, and she looks at relationships. And she had done cortisol research before. So I said, okay, we'll have the couples watching, you can get your couple thing, and I'll get my media thing. And
so there's no comparison between couples and people on their own watching media, see how that affects their cortisol levels?
You mean, would that?
Comparison between if I watch it with my spouse or if I watch it with my own.
I think it would be really interesting. One of the fascinating things about the data is the videotapes of watching them watch. Because you do see this dynamic. We do have, we've coded their nonverbals for touch and laughter and sort of closeness where they were sitting on the couch and that sort of thing. And there's, if that person weren't there, right, then you wouldn't have someone to touch when you're scared, which could, affect cortisol. So I think it'll be interesting, to dig deeper into that data. But I believe that you're right, that this co-viewing experience is likely a bit different, and so having a comparison group. Turns out the cortisol research is expensive, so without grant funding, so each couple costs $100. Each person was $100. To run their data. We also collected another marker of stress called alpha amylase, which is more momentary, and we just got that for free because the guy in the lab was interested, and so he's like, I'll just give that to you. We're like, thank you, we have more to work with here. So it is time consuming and it's expensive, but I think those are the kinds of questions that I'd love to see the immediate effects of health research move into.
So Eric, have you analyzed any of the behavioral nonverbal data? Because if you think about that old school throwback Zillman study where it was co-viewing, did your partner ascribe to gender roles? So if I were a man, I wanted to watch with a woman who was scared versus if I was, a woman, I wanted the guy to take care of me. Do we see that influences?
Well, we didn't ask about gender roles. But we did, in terms of the dynamic,
just non-verbally, if I had a partner that was like this, how did that influence?
And we did, so we actually just finished got reliability and finished the coding of the couples. So I haven't looked at the data other than a very quick, dirty way, so I wouldn't want to speak to it. There's something happening with laughter. So laughter, whether it's nervous laughter, and then something is going on in there. So in about 6 months or so. Or whenever I talk, I'm like, oh, on the plane, I'm going to look at it, and then it doesn't happen. But that's coming soon. We also, videos are fascinating because you'd see the gender roles playing out. Like, there'd be a guy who's like, oh, so they're like, oh, I'm so scared. Every so often there'd be a woman who's like, and it seemed kind of counter to those. So the nonverbal data is really rich and really interesting. But it's kind of this untapped resource at the moment.
I have a question. You talked about humor, and this is an idea that I've had for a while and played with it for a little bit, and I think it's very relevant to emotions. So what about different types of humor?
Yes.
Some humor is more humorous and others very sarcastic, and it doesn't make you feel amusement at all.
Humor is a tough cookie in a lot of ways, because it is so subjective, and there are many different types. And so the humor that I tend to focus on the emotion of amusement, right? So I'm not looking at, being cynical or sarcastic or being judgmental or getting people angry it's really about being amused and feeling amusement, right? And so at this point, at least in my own research, I haven't looked at different types. I'm focusing more on things that are clever or wit or something that would help people smile, right? But in different contexts, like political contexts, for example, using irony or using sarcasm, people might be amused, but they're also feeling other things as well. And so it is, I know, done some work in this area. So that's something which, in a health context, it would be important to separate out the different types of humor and then seeing, okay, so there's amusement, ideally, that's what it's supposed to do, is you think it's funny, but what else might be going along with it that could influence the effect of that type of humor on other outcomes? Does that answer your question? I didn't answer.
How do you see the role of positive emotions in motivating people to take actions? Because it seems to me that either for positive emotions, I'm so passive, I don't want to make any change, I'm going to keep it, or like when you put it with other types of negative emotions, that the positive emotions like hope, loss, and independent, like predictive power. Do you think there's any role like of positive emotions in
I do, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and it's another way in which the emotional persuasion literature has been so stunted, right? And so being focused on fear is like the obvious, sort of pink elephant in the room, or that we all focus on, at the exclusion of positive emotions. And this is where I think it's important to distinguish discrete emotions from affect, right? Because positive moods, everything's fine, right? But the discrete emotions, several, or a few at least, have unique action tendencies or action tendencies that are relevant. So hope, some argue, it only exists in negative circumstances, is it really positive, but it does feel good. So when you're hopeful, it can inspire you. Pride, I think, is particularly interesting because when you're proud of yourself, right, that could help you continue to do something. So when we think about health maintenance behaviors, positive emotion might have a tremendous role in helping us maintain, right, because we don't want to change. And so the goal in maintaining quitting smoking, maintaining healthy living style, that messages that promote, pride, right, or happiness, joy, would help you to continue on this path that's already a good path. And so I think an interesting question is, when do positive emotions play a role? Not like do they, and I believe they do, in changing from an unhealthy behavior to a healthy one versus maintaining the healthy behaviors we're already engaging in.
I have a question. So there seems to be several emotions versus affect that are more dominant in the research. So I wonder, how would you clarify the distinction between affect and emotions? Like how to select types such as need versus hope. So how do you decide on which ones are worth doing research?
I think that's a really good question. So generally, we think about moods and emotions, and that they are both within the general category of affect, that we have these feelings. Right? And moods are untargeted. They're sort of more general, they tend to be more long-lasting, and they don't have specific targets. Whereas the discrete emotions have particular action tendencies associated with them. So in terms of what emotions might be relevant for studying, I think a lot of it is thinking about what the match is between the message context or the health context and what emotions might make more sense. So it's hard to imagine how anger might be productive as I'm trying to get you to quit smoking or exercise, but anger can be very productive if I want you to sign a petition to get some kind of legislative change so that we have more healthy options in schools, for example. So anger can be very productive if we want political action. When we want individual action, anger is a little bit of a tougher sell, harder to imagine, right? So there's some contexts where the fear is somewhat natural. There are others where it feels manipulative to try to scare people about something that isn't really as big of a threat. And I think this is what we see with sort of marijuana, anti-marijuana ads, where people are like, oh, it's not that dangerous, really, you're trying to scare me, make it this terrible thing. And it comes across as manipulative and unrealistic. So I think part of it is using some sense with an understanding of the context and the emotion. And then, of course, pilot testing is always a wonderful thing. When you think about this, what emotions come to mind, and what are your reactions, and how is this responding? So, we can always use our sort of academic knowledge, and then we get what people actually say.
That's a great answer. I have another question.
Well, actually, we're out of time now, so I need to get to lunch and need to get to the airport soon. So thank you everyone for attending